This was the most difficult movie to shoot. You know, we were literally at the mercy of nature. Difficult to shoot on sand. It's the heat. You're out there for 12 to 15 hours. The tide comes up twice a day and the beach just disappears. Movie making is kind of like an act of faith in and of itself. At least for me, it is. Hi, I'm M. Night Shyamalan. I'm the writer-director of Old, and this is Notes on a Scene. This movie came to me as in an unusual way. It came from my daughters. It was a gift that they gave me, a graphic novel on Father's Day, and I started reading it, and it was so cinematic. The basic premise of it was so provocative that I started getting ideas about how to shoot it right away. I was so inspired by the tone of Sandcastle, the graphic novel. It had a kind of a mystery, but like a little wit to it, Twilight Zone, Black Mirror quality as I was reading it. And I could feel kind of that angle, and I've been enjoying taking that kind of irreverent angle on subjects recently. The sequence that I wanted to show you guys is early on the beach. It's at the tail of everybody still having fun, right at that nexus moment when the darkness starts to happen on the beach. Why I chose it, it has a bunch of cinematic languages that were important to me, so I thought that it would be a cool one to talk about just to see kind of the seeds of the languages that are throughout the film. As I'm looking at kind of this frozen image here of Trent here as a child, this first thing that you're gonna see here is a language that is borrowed from what some people call Australian New Wave, which was like movies like Picnic at Hanging Rock and Walkabout. And what we were trying to do with the language was use the cinema verite Australian New Wave language of movement and zooms, almost like it's random and it's fluctuating and alive, a sense that the kids are in kind of in the present. And so you'll see through the movie, when you see this language, people are kind of becoming in the present and they're not really thinking about time. They're almost kind of timeless. And so that's what this particular sequence is. We did this, I think, 40 times. It's really difficult. I gave the kids, you know, movement, and then the camera operator complete liberty to kind of feel his way through it. You know, at the beginning, you have this kind of moment at the top right before it zooms out, and there was this feeling like I wanted you to not understand what was happening. So you're using this movement to create an unease. There's so many ways to create unease in the audience. One of them is being very still and being proscenium with your framing, and another one is this kind of movement of zooms that was indicative of the 70s in that era of filmmaking. And it's very eerie to see this. You hear the kids kind of giggling. I use sound effects of them laughing and giggling, and of course they're kids, so they had the ball shooting this.
Oh my God, got you!
I was reading something and I was thinking about freeze tag and how it was ironic that children sometimes play the idea that they're frozen in time in a movie where their lives are gonna speed up really, really fast. This was kind of a fun way right before all the chaos starts. And if you watch carefully at the end of this, we crank the speed here so it starts to slow down right about here, and you don't notice it on her hair, and then you see them running in the background and they're in slow motion. You know, if we're being broad-stroked about casting, I would say I tack towards theater-trained actors and children, or people that have never acted before. The rationale behind that is the ones that have no craft, the children, they're just themselves. They have a hard time even suppressing that innate quality about themselves. So it's wonderful when you're trying to capture something on a film. They're so organic and real. And I juxtapose them with theater-trained actors who know their craft at the highest level, who on the other side of the spectrum can do the same thing. So taking those two kind of actors and putting them in the same movie, it's supposed to feel organic, and that's what those two versions of actors do inside of a very formalized way of shooting. So this scene here, the one that follows the freeze tag scene, is a rare scene in some ways because there's a lot of shots in it for me. I normally don't do a lot of shots in a scene. As you saw, the freeze tag scene had one shot, but this has a bunch of shots, and they're almost graphic novel shots. The doll's in focus, as is the person in the background.
Honey, I'm home. I told you, I don't want to live like this. I'm gonna live in a condominium. I'm going for a drive to calm down.
Essentially, I wrote a fight scene, and one could even say this is a flashback but we see it through the eyes of the children playing who are just regurgitating the fight. The idea was to put the representation of him in the female doll and the representation of her in the robot doll. It's more the colors of what they're feeling, and they're kind of imagining themselves and the partner when they're looking at these things, and the irony of they're on vacation and they have so affected their children in this way that this family is in crisis when they get to this beach. Their silent reactions to this are very poignant.
Honey, I'm home. I told you, I don't want to live like this. I'm gonna live in a condominium.
By looking at the dolls, they're looking at each other, so it's a wonderful way for them to be looking at each other without looking at each other. She can be hurt, but if she was staring at her husband who she's having trouble with, she wouldn't be that open about how hurt she is, or sad, or having empathy for him. She wouldn't be able to use those colors if she was looking right at her husband, but she's looking at a representation of themselves in this. This was a beautiful way to make paintings that juxtapose against each other, but it worked out, and even the prop department and I finding these kind of fantasy element dolls added a really nice touch, because it's so much armor and so much fantasy on these two that it's not one-to-one.
I'm going for a drive to calm down. I'm really, really hungry.
Me too, my stomach's growling.
Me too.
Like if you just take this frame, the negative space of the rocks here is a big decision. I use every frame kind of, think of it as a window. That's not the end of the storytelling. There's story going on here, there's story going on here. But if you take this robot, for example, and you put him back here, back where he was, or, you know, in this position like that, it has a similar impact to the mermaid doll that I had with Gael. We're juxtaposing what do these dolls mean to these individuals. I try not to have them mean the exact same thing. In this case, I often do this where I cut someone's face off. That creates a situation for me emotionally where it's unknowable. Part of the person is unknowable or hiding. And so there's this sense of her leaving her family or leaving her situation. At least that's what emotionally it means to me. She's supposed to be on vacation and relaxed and all that stuff. And this representation of her armored and leaving is a graphic novel kind of painting of her situation. One of the reasons I wanted to show you this sequence, it's a mini movement of genre. As you saw the first scene, which was playful and so lighthearted, almost genreless. And then it comes to this scene with the robots, which is essentially a straight drama. And then the next scene will kick into mystery. You know, I'm very interested in using hands and feet and insinuations of people's emotions. I often tell the actors, you think the thoughts and we will imagine the rest. And when I talk to people about movies, they'll imagine that this was a close-up. Yeah, where's the close-up of the kids' faces at the sand berm? You had it in there. And no, there was none. You imagine, you did that storytelling. I really enjoy when you make it incomplete and you have to participate in the painting. And this would be an example of that, this berm, and you start to pull all these pieces out.
Whoa! Who would leave this?
Hey, Mom!
You can see one of the reasons I wanted to make the movie is my love of the original Planet of the Apes. So it's like the Planet of the Apes, the end of it is set on this beach surrounded by a rock wall. They find these artifacts in the sand. I remember seeing it as a kid and it was the original one, and I just felt the imagination just firing away. And so we juxtaposed these two shots over their faces here, and you know, you can see there's a ton of negative space here.
From the hotel! They're so rusted!
Put that down! You can get infected or you cut yourself.
We've kicked into slight mystery mode and you start to feel uneasy. They're finding it innocuous, and by the framing and everything, you understand that that's not the case.
Next activity.
What's happening?
Let's play hide and
I
seek.
found stuff from the hotel in the sand.
So in this escalation of genre, we started with the slice of life, then we went to the drama, then we went to the mystery. This is the child is playing hide and seek, and when it turns from lighthearted to kind of horror. And so there's an initial thing where he's looking around and there's a little beat where he notices there's no fish anywhere near this beach. So that's already a kind of a dissonant note. So it's starting to turn from mystery to thriller a little bit there. So, I don't use handheld a lot. I find it a very strong color, like Tabasco sauce. In this case, whenever we are in the water in this film, we chose to not anchor the camera. We chose to make it float a bit. And then behind him comes this floating body. And for me, how to make something disturbing or uneasy is like that you're ahead of the character or you realize it at the moment of the character. Those are important decisions. In this one where a child is unaware and then this movement of something threatening coming towards him from the back, as you're ahead of him, it's really disturbing. And then here to kind of quietly have her arm go around him like seaweed. And then the music kind of reaches a crescendo and goes and, this is the moment, when you're writing a screenplay, when did the terrorists take over the building? When does the boat hit the iceberg? This is that moment. And then from here on, it starts to escalate in momentum. I have a rigid almost process of when we bring music into the storytelling. The editor's not allowed to put any music into it for many cuts. We do not look for help from our partners in music until the movie is singing in its own way, has its own cadence and movement. Now, philosophically, music is so strong a color in the storytelling that I'm very careful with how we use it. I want it to be distinct. Sometimes I want it on top of the movie, like in Signs, and sometimes it's atmospheric. So with the composer, who's Trevor, his name's Trevor, we talked about using primal sounds. We were inspired by the Planet of the Apes score, that conch shell kind of sound that they had. What was our version of the primal music? And this is the first beat of that mystery. We went from that handheld kind of rare moment where I'm using kind of choppy editing to create a visceralness for me, and then to this big vista of huge negative space here with our rock wall and our tiny family here as they hear their son screaming. Normally, there's been a one-to-one with kind of suspense and claustrophobia in a kind of a contained atmosphere in one of my movies, the basement in Signs, or the room they're being held in Split. In this case, this is a big beach. It's 1.25 miles long. How does one make that feel claustrophobic? But this idea of having the rocks be dominant in these frames here is imposing. They feel that the characters feel small and vulnerable. It implies a sense of how do we get out of here if something were to go wrong. One of the things that I think is a lost art in modern day cinema and that I'm trying to learn and trying to get better at is blocking. Where are the characters? How do they move in the frame in relation to the camera? The reason that's gone away a little bit is we kind of make movies in the editing room now. We get tons of footage, and then we just make a version of the scene in the editing room. In the old days, you had a dolly, you didn't have any computers, you were shooting it on film. You would figure out, okay, you come here, you grab your dress, then he comes forward, then he takes the wine. And so there's always this conversation of where you are in the frame. And so blocking for me is a critical part of storytelling. So when I drew this that kind of slightly canted and lower as the family members pop up into frame as they know something's wrong, and in different depths of field there. Depth of field means where is the focus? And then this family who you see in the distance here, they're not really connected to our main family, but soon to be very tied to them. You want to say, what is their emotional connection to the child screaming? So I wouldn't do a close-up of them here. Someone else's child screaming in the distance isn't as personal to them. So this is a wider feeling of their emotion. This is what they're feeling. They're interested, they're disturbed a little bit. If someone needs help, they look, but it's meant to convey that they don't have the same emotions as these guys. This is their child's voice in the air. And this is just a stranger's child. And this kind of meeting in the middle of the mother and the child, he's pointing off camera the whole time, is the last image of this sequence that I wanted to show you because it keeps escalating after that in terms of intensity. This was a really interesting movie for me because normally I pick someone's point of view and tell you through the whole movie, but this is a group feeling. This is a group feeling, and soon everyone will be at the same place of what the hell is going on this beach. The movies that I try to make are dealing with something I'm struggling with or something I'm scared about, and Old is definitely about this moment where I'm like seeing my kids grow up and I'm seeing my parents get older in a way that's frightening, and I'm fully aware that this moment today my kids will not look like this very soon, and my parents won't be like that very soon. I'm fully aware of how fast everything is moving, so it's a scary moment, and I think that the movie represents that fear for me, that this is just today, that they're gonna, these people that I love so much are gonna be like this just today. And I think the characters in the movie get to a place that I aspire to get to, which is I'm okay. I'm okay being right here, right now. And those characters that don't come to that notion of it's okay to be right here, right now, don't think about what you lost and don't think about what's gonna happen. The characters that stay in those spaces, it ends very badly. It's very scary for them. So a lot of this movie is about this aspiration to be present.